Harry Potter was not my first introduction to urban fantasy by a long shot. In fact, I wasn't even a kid when it came out. I was reading it in my 20s, maybe by the time it was done in my 30s. And it's Thursday, you know what that means? It's time for us to have another Throwback Thursday. And we're gonna go back in time, throw up that celebration, because Heart of the Stories we tell, and me, Rob the host, is going to take us back to a quick nostalgic look and see how a story was that might be a little bit on the older side. So celebrate your week almost being over as we look at Harry Potter. And I'm not just starting a new series here, because yes, I realize I still have Infinite stuff going, and I still have Babylon 5 going. This is one look at overall the whole series. And that's what makes this hard. Very hard. I already covered several parts of this in a series I called The Three Harrys of Urban Fantasy, where I compared Harry Potter to Harry Dresden from the Dresden Files and Harry Keogh from the Necroscope series. I also considered doing this as a J.K. Rowling's spotlight, but I don't think that's quite right either. So I think it's getting thrown into Throwback Thursday. So once again, it's stop. Spoiler time. So let's talk about the setting for a minute. It's pretty important. I'm sure a lot of you are expecting me to talk about Hogwarts, but I want to talk about the time frame instead. We never see any of the Moogle-borns, not even Hermione, go for a cell phone. So it's always kind of boggled my mind. Is this something that happened in the 80s? Is this something that happened in the 70s? It's generically now, but it doesn't really feel like now. I mean, just imagine the scenes in Deathly Hallows. How much different would it be if they needed to get a cell phone? Okay, so I'm not really sure exactly when, but my gut puts it somewhere probably in the 70s or 80s. But calling it generic now, and just urban fantasy as a setting, works just fine. Yeah, we have set pieces like Hogsworth and Hogsmeade and the different houses, but in all honesty, the setting is a magical land in the nowish time. What about characters? I would feel ridiculous spending any serious amount of time talking about these characters. If you're watching this, hell, if you're alive in this century, you know who these three are, and they're the main characters. We could do a whole thing about the expanded cast, but this cast gets so big, and I mean not just in the movies, but I mean in the books where they have even more stuff going on. We could talk about Dumbledore, and we could talk about Snape, and we could talk about Hermione, and we could talk about Hagrid, but you know what? You already know all that. The characters are the wizards that take up the world, primarily Harry, but he's far from alone. The plot is where things get interesting, though. With only the occasional flashbacks, the story is pretty linear. However, the plot itself gets a lot of shit. People like to call Harry not just the boy that survived, but the boy that got lucky. And I want you to consider this for a minute. Almost every protagonist in every story gets lucky at one point or another. Now, yes, there are flaws in the story that I could point out, but it's a young adult book, and one that I think ages well with the reader, or at least it did as it came out. Maybe not so much today if you read them all in one scoop. But at the end of the day, with the exception of some boring parts in Deathly Hallows, I think that the plot worked very well. Especially when we get to point of view. The unreliable narrator is all over this story, and it's mostly told because we only get Harry's point of view. Now, this has its strengths and weaknesses, and I'm going to very specifically call out one of the weaknesses here. In Deathly Hallows, we spend a good portion of the time with Harry not following the main action of the story. The main action is what's going on at Hogwarts, and we really could have used another point of view character there. But all in all, since I like the first-person point of view and I really like using unreliable narrators, I think Harry did a good job as that main character. And then, oh boy, themes and symbolism. From people that think that wands are a man's, physical representation, to people who believe that Harry is just the byproduct of reading and redoing character tropes. There's a lot. But the main theme is coming of age. It's a power fantasy. It's one of those things of, hey, you know how your life sucks? Well, it's going to get better. You know why? Because secretly you're a fill-in-the-blank here. But what about racism as a theme? Let's think about this. We have a half-blood, a pure-blood, and a mud-blood, all working together specifically in a world where a lot of people treat people who are not purebloods as inferior. And if you think about it, the fact that Hermione would be the one to be considered inferior in that scenario is just hysterical. But there's another type of prejudice, another type of racism, sexism, ism, the houseisms. A lot of people I know, when they take those silly tests online that say, which house would you fall into? Fall into Slytherin. But is it just me, or did the books totally make Slytherin out to be the house of villains? The house that was just bad guys? But why? Aren't all of them good houses? Aren't all of them based on traditions the wizards wanted to keep? And let's not forget the casual racism slash slavery of the house elves. And all of those are themes that are tied up rather well, along with the can you love someone above your station? Can you find someone to be with the rest of your life? What does it mean to be cursed? I'm curious, do you think that these themes and the others that it was presented were presented well, or do you think they were too childish in a take? I think they go back and forth. And that brings me to where my end-all theory on Harry Potter is. J.K. Rowling grew up writing these books. As an author, she got a little better with each one, notwithstanding my problem with Deathly Hallows. And in general, you could see the themes mature in each one, and they follow Harry. As Harry gets older, he's dealing with more. He's having to adapt to more. There's more nuance, more shades of gray in his world, which makes his world feel more like our world, or maybe the world of someone growing up in high school. Just like I did back when I first did the three Harrys, I'm going to give Harry Potter a silver, and a strong silver at that. If you're not into YA books, maybe you might want to skip it. But honestly, if you were willing to give YA a chance, Harry Potter is one of the better ones. In fact, it created its own subgenre, I would say. All of those coming-of-age stories that we're seeing now in the same YA theme are ones that became because of Harry Potter. And honestly, I think that there's a lot more stories we could tell in that universe. I don't always agree with the author on the route she took, and sometimes I think that if she could go back, she would have rewritten Sorcerer/Philosopher's Stone a little differently. But to be perfectly honest, it's a great fun adventure as we learn about the boy who survived, as we learn about the world around it, although the world building could be a little better. And I'll be honest, some of the rules of how their magic work don't quite fit in my head on how they work. If you're not much of a reader, the movies still do a pretty good job at getting the most entertaining parts on the screen. Again, they could use a little bit of oomph, and I'm not going to give any of these solid gold ratings. But at the end of the day, the movies were just as awesome as the book. In fact, my biggest complaint about the books and then repeated in the movie is the amount of downtime we have in Deathly Hallows. Yes, there's some great character moments in the forest, but realistically, at that point in the story, I felt like we could have done a little more, or a little less, I should say, of running around. The fact that they then split Deathly Hallows into two movies and kept in almost all of the slow parts that I groaned over in the book makes me wonder why it is they didn't fix that in the movie. I was hoping Deathly Hallows would be a better movie than the book. Instead, the movie wasn't as good as the book, and it didn't fix the book's biggest mistake. But those were my thoughts. What are yours? This is a story that I think is going to be a timeless classic, so let me know down in the comments what your timeless thoughts are. And for now, I need you to hit that like and share button if you like this, and subscribe to the channel, hit that alert button, because I'm trying to build a community. This is a great time to talk about stories. They're all over us. Movies, TV shows, new types of entertainment like Netflix and Hulu, and this is your way of talking about all of them with someone who's trying to learn how to be a writer himself. So, click those buttons, let me know what you think, and for now, thank you for walking with me through the heart of the stories we tell. Have a good night.